Hello and welcome to Sam Not So Wise. My name is Sam. So, books are subjective, right? People pick up books for a multitude of different reasons. People pick up specific books for a specific reason a lot of the time. And for many, that is escapism, which is great. And I do that too. I read a lot of books to escape into wonderful worlds or fantastic futures. But some people also really like to be challenged. And sometimes I do too. Sometimes I like to try and work that grey matter, keep it fresh and young for as long as possible. Now, it is a wonderful feeling when you read a really complex book and you get it. It can also be frustrating when you don't get it, but I like to think of it as kind of a motivator to read more and to expand my horizons more and to develop that old brain. And you know what? Rereads can be so rewarding when you reread a book that you can see that something is there, has fruit to be picked that you cannot quite reach yet, but upon a reread you may be able to reach that extra inch and grab that fruit and get the wonderful tasty juice from within. Where is this metaphor coming from? Anyway, so I'm just going to talk about some books that can be considered quite complex. Maybe you'll see my list and be like, that's not complex, but at least I thought they could be considered as slightly complex that I've really enjoyed myself. And then I'm going to talk about some books that I want to read, some of them coming up very soon and some a little bit further in the distance. So the nursery children are screaming as usual, and with that and much further ado, let's talk about some difficult books. So let's kick off the video with some Dick. Now get your filthy heads out of the gutter. I'm obviously talking about the 60s and 70s sci-fi author Philip K. Dick, who is kind of famous for his drug-infested, trippy books where the line between reality and fantasy are extremely blurred, and therein lies the difficulty of many of his books, as we struggle to know what is real, what is the truth of the situation, what's real and what's not real. By the way, I'm going to try and fly through these authors and books because I always blab on too long and I don't want the video to be really long like I'm doing now. So, Philip K. Dick, I've only read 3 of his books, which is kind of shameful considering that I'm a sci-fi fan, so I really need to get to more, but I've loved all 3 that I've read. So we'll start with Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said. This book is set in a dystopian world of police control. And one day our protagonist, who is a famous actor, awakes to find out that nobody remembers who he is. And so his reality seems to be completely crumbling around him as the rest of society goes on as normal. So we're trying to work out what is going on, what's real. Is he completely losing his mind? So it is kind of trippy and difficult to know what the truth of the situation of this book is, but it is fantastic, a really fun ride. Next, we have probably my favorite Dick book, which is Ubik. I was given this wonderful copy by the angelic Whitney from Secret Source of Storycraft. Now, this story is set in a world where psychic powers are fairly commonplace and cryogenic freezing is used to elongate lives, only for the rich, obviously. And at some point in the story, our main cast of characters start to perceive time differently. It seems like time is moving backwards and things are decaying, which can only be stopped by the product called Ubik. This is a very funny and bizarre story, and it is certainly a mind melder, as again, we are trying to understand what the hell is going on, what is real, why is this happening? So it can be quite confusing. Now, the final one is A Scanner Darkly. Now, I read this quite a while ago, and the nature of the story means that I've kind of forgotten a lot. But this story is about a man who lives a double life as an undercover policeman, following users of a psychedelic drug called Substance D. And to fit in with those who he is surveilling, he takes the drug himself and socializes with them. And because of that, he becomes highly addicted to this drug. What results is utter confusion over his life. He can't tell whether he is in his working life or his real life. And it is just a very surreal view on the lives of hard drug addicts and extremely depressing. So again, we are just completely unsure about what is real, which side of his life is real and which one he's in at the time. So it can be confusing to follow the story, but it is also difficult for the subject matter, especially as considering this is a semi-autobiographical book. So 3 books by Philip K. Dick I've read so far, all quite confusing, but all brilliant, and I highly recommend you give them a try. So the next book I'm going to talk about is one I don't see talked about too much by other YouTubers, and that is The City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Now, on the surface, this seems like a fairly simple story. It is a story about a city attempting an uprising within a dystopian fantasy setting where an empirical power exercises its control over the population. So that is a fairly simple setup to a story, but what makes this story difficult is the way it is written, the structure and the storytelling device. So it is very episodic in nature. We have lots of small chapters that don't follow on from each other, so you get different perspectives through each chapter. I think the first time you get a repeat character is about 150 pages into the book. So the continuity or the lack of continuity is what makes this book difficult, as we get the whole city's perspective from different character points of view. So yeah, it's difficult to follow what's going on. A lot of people like to be able to build up some character momentum, but you don't get much of that in this book. So some people really bounce off it. Some people struggle to get through and know what is going on because he doesn't hold your hand either with any of the world building, any of the terms. You just kind of have to learn through the many different perspectives in the book. I think it's absolutely genius, and it is important for the storytelling because an uprising is a wide, a widespread phenomenon. It's not just a few characters, and I think that really shows in this book, so highly recommended there. Sticking with Tchaikovsky, I'm going to mention Children of Time. This evolutionary sci-fi book has become extremely popular within the sci-fi community. Maybe it's not overly complex, but I think some people will and have bounced off this kind of storytelling. It certainly isn't like a thrilling beach read, for example. It's not an action-packed story with spaceship battles or anything like that. So we have the evolution of some spiders. It's a sped up evolution thanks to a virus, and within the story, kind of similar to A City of Last Chances, the characters are kind of replaced quite frequently. So again, you don't really get continuity of characters. They're similar names, but they're not the same people, spider people, if you will. So some people might also find the science to be a little bit over-explained and a little bit complex. Too much sci in the sci-fi. I love that kind of stuff and I understood it. So, but some people might find that very difficult if they're not scientifically minded. Also, there is a human side to this book, and that has some complexity within it as well, where we are following a woman who kind of melds with AI over time, and it becomes hard to distinguish between the woman and the machine. A little bit Dickensian in a way, because yeah, the reality of the situation is very hard to understand what is real and what is not. So overall, not the most complex book in the world, but it certainly ain't a simple walk in the park. So I'm going to change tack a little bit for the next 2 books because I am primarily a sci-fi and fantasy reader. I do sometimes read outside of those genres, and the next 2 are contemporary fiction, lit fic, whatever you want to call it. So the first one is Trainspotting by Irvin Welsh. Now, what makes this one so difficult is the phonetic spelling of the text. This book was obviously by no means the first to do this, but generally people find it a lot harder to read a book when it's written in this phonetic style. So already we have a barrier that makes it more difficult. But what makes this even more difficult is it is written in a strong Scottish accent. So even as a Brit, it took me a while to get used to the style, and it never really became easy to fly through. So you just immediately have this physical barrier that makes the reading of the story very hard. Like there was one word I remember, it was not until about halfway through the book, I'd read this word many times and I had no idea what it was, but it took half of the book for me to finally understand what it was. So further to this, the content itself is also difficult in nature. It's very depressing, it's very sad, and as it explores the grueling world of serious heroin addiction. So big, warning if that kind of thing affects you, but what resulted in the end was something brilliant and something beautiful, if devastating, and it is a fantastic read if you can get past the phonetic reading. The other contemporary litfic, whatever you want to call it, is Catch-22. Now, I had to read this twice. So the first time I read it, I'm not a DNFer. I've only ever DNF'd this and Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. But I came back to this like a year later after DNFing it, and I absolutely loved it. So the first time I bounced off because it is really hard to get into. So this is a World War II kind of historical fiction story around a pilot called Yossarian and his crew. Now, this book is not told chronologically, and many of the stories overlap. Many of the kind of anecdotes overlap with each other. We also get different perspectives from all of the characters, and we get scenes repeated from all of the different perspectives. So you'll see something happen, and then maybe later in the book you'll see it happen again from a different perspective, and it's all jumbled up. It's very difficult to follow, but it is brilliant. It is a very clever book. Now, it's been a really long time since I read this as well, so I'd love to reread it. I might do that actually very soon. And it's very moving and has a lot of comedy to it. But yes, it does take some getting used to. You might stall, you might take your time with it, but which is what I recommend you do. And it can be hard to lock down the chronology of the story, but if you push through, you will get a lot from it. And it, like I said before, it is a very moving story and worth the effort. So let's get back to the bread and butter and talk about some sci-fi with Frank Herbert's Dune. Now, some people may disagree with me here. It's a very popular book. So many people have read it and understood it. But would you give this to a beginner reader of sci-fi, fantasy, or anything? Absolutely not. This is not for beginners at all. Now, there's not really much I can say to add to the conversation of Dune. It has been talked about a lot. But the world building in this story does not hold your hand. There are so many terms, so many things to learn, and you don't get given big dumps of exposition to explain it to you. Also, the philosophy within this book is quite deep, quite complicated, and you could be excused for just ignoring the philosophical side. You would miss a lot of the story, but it is quite deep philosophically, and this only increases as the series moves on. They get very, very sniff your own farty, in first a good way in my opinion, and then just a little too much in God Emperor of Dune, for example. So these Dune books, brilliant, very rewarding, but you do have to work for it a bit. So the next one, you guys, if you've watched me before, you know I'm going to talk about Iain M. Banks, obviously. Now the Culture series, people say you can basically start anywhere because it's a bunch of standalones. This is where I say do not start with Excession. It really helps for you to get context of the society before reading this book. Now, this book is difficult for two main reasons. One, the main characters are mostly AIs. They are what are called minds of the ships that run the society. So you're getting the characters of AI ships, basically. And there are a lot of them. There are a lot of these characters, and they all have very long names that aren't traditional names. They're not easy to remember. It's not like you have Pete the Ship, you have, let's see if we can find an example, because they are bloody brilliant. Sorry, oh my god, no. So you have names such as Anticipation of a New Lover's Arrival, Serious Callers Only, Wisdom Like Science, Shoot Them Later, Limivorous. So yeah, this is quite difficult to follow because the characters are not, your standard characters, and it can get confusing. But this is also a story about plotting against each other within the society, and there are so many layers to the plot, so many subplots, so many subgroups of the AIs. Each has their own agenda and works to undermine others. They're working with one group and another, but has their own secret agenda. So it can be basically quite confusing to follow the strands of the story, but it is extremely clever. It is extremely engaging. And if you work to understand it, then you will reap the rewards with a fantastic book that really goes into the deep undercurrents of the society, which you don't get within any of the books that came before it. So if you're going to read this, pay high attention and you will probably love it. Next up, we have The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. Now, what makes this difficult is the sheer amount of information we are exposed to. This book kind of just serves as a history to the world leading up to the second book in the series, where it really starts to slow down. It is very exposition heavy. Events move very quickly, and you kind of get a feeling of whiplash as we aren't allowed to settle on any moment for longer than 10 to 20 pages, really. There are so many characters introduced, and you know what? So many of them are killed off, so it makes it hard to know who is important. Now, a further difficulty could be for people like me who are pasty whiteys and aren't used to kind of Asian names, for example. So they can feel somewhat hard to distinguish because we're not used to them. Now, that is just an us problem, and you do get used to it eventually. And there are like character keys within the book, so that does help. But this book is, basically it just moves a lot happens, but it is a wonderful setup to the story. I'm almost finished with book 2, and this book really did set the stage wonderfully. So in a similar fashion, we have Shogun by James Clavell. Now, what I mean by similarly is that we really need time to get used to this world and the workings of the politics, but it's very intricate and complex, and the power shifts a lot, so it's really hard to know what is important. And we get a lot of names, a lot of different kind of concepts of how everything works. Also, again, for the stupid pasty white people like me, it is very hard to understand some of the names and the differences between them, or some of the concepts that are very different to ours. Another struggle is it's massive. Now, I didn't find it a struggle, but some people might find it hard to read 1,100 pages. But yeah, not really the most difficult book in the world, but again, it's not really for beginners. You have to pay attention and just kind of enjoy the journey, and you will be rewarded. This is one of my favorite books of all time, probably in my top 10, a wonderful character-focused historical fiction book. So those were just a few examples of books that I think are more challenging. Some people may not find them the most challenging in the world. Some people may find them too challenging, but they're certainly not books for beginners, but books that require some effort from the reader, and the rewards are therefore even greater. In my opinion, there are many other books that I could have chosen, but these are the ones I chose to highlight today. So what am I going to challenge myself with in the future, the near future and the distant? The first one that is definitely going to be happening is Malazan Book of the Fallen, starting with Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson. So I will be starting in the summer. This is definitely going to happen. This is very famous for being a very complex and long series, 10 big long books that don't hold your hand, not a lot of continuation with characters and just big concepts, but I'm very much looking forward to starting this. The next one that I've been hankering to read for a really long time is Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. This is supposed to be kind of one of the most confusing sci-fi fantasy series of all time. You have your unreliable narrator and yeah, just lots of high concepts and trippiness going on. I don't really know much about it, to be honest, but I really want to read this. I don't know when I'm going to start. Maybe this year, but definitely next year. The next one is the author Neil Stephenson. So I have this, Seven Eves, which the angelic Whitney sent me again. I will be getting to this maybe later in the year, the second half of the year. But the one that is very famous, the most famous, is Anathem, which is a huge tome of a book, and again supposed to be very difficult in nature. I am going to be buddy reading this with Whitney and with Bart from Bart's Bookspace over the summer as well, so I've got a difficult summer coming up. Also, somebody who is supposed to be quite difficult in the sci-fi world and the sci-fi concepts is Greg Egan. Again, lovely Whitney. I think she's trying to expand my brain a little bit here. Sent me this, Permutation City. I don't really know much about Greg Egan at all or about this book, but I've heard that he's very science heavy and it can just be very difficult to get into the concepts. I want to read more Philip K. Dick. Absolutely need to get that done. Samuel Delaney is supposed to be very difficult as well. I have Babel 17 on my Kindle, which I want to read God knows when, maybe this year. Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, that's supposed to be quite difficult, generally down to his prose, but also due to the very difficult graphic content of the book. Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. Actually, anything by Thomas Pynchon is supposed to be quite difficult as well. I really want to get to that. And also Janny Wirtz, who is supposed to be kind of a master of prose, where it's not the most flowing to read because you really need to take your time reading the prose and understand what is going on. And again, lots of deep concepts within this fantasy world. So that is what is on the plate coming up. So we've made it to the end of the video. I've talked too much again, so if you've made it this far, I thank you so much. I really appreciate it. If you are new to the channel, please think about subscribing and joining the journey. If you liked the video, please press that thumbs up. If you didn't like it, there's absolutely no reason to press the thumbs down button. Just saying. But I want to hear from you lot. Tell me some books that you have really enjoyed that may be considered complex, some authors who are known for writing complex books. I'm always looking to expand my tiny little brain. Let me know what you thought of what I chose, whether you've read them and thought them to be complex or actually really easy and I'm just stupid. Please let me know, I'd like to hear that. But that is it for now, so thank you once again, and I'll see you in another video soon. Goodbye.